Hey everybody, this is Zach Ditmars, production manager for Fish Talk Magazine. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Live with Lenny. Tonight, Lenny's going to come on in just a few minutes here. He's going to run through the current fishing report for the Chesapeake Bay and Mid-Atlantic coast, what's hot and what's not. So then he's going to do a deep dive into advanced tactics for chunking for tuna offshore. But first...
Hey, good evening, Zach.
Hey, what's happening?
Not much. How are you doing?
It's been a great day. We had a great morning out in the bay. What were we doing today?
We did a video boat review on a new Boston Whaler 280 Dauntless.
Incredible.
It was a cool boat. We had a good time.
Incredible boat.
Everything was spectacular. 58. We hit 58 miles an hour, twin 300s. It was pretty rocking.
Yeah. I didn't take my hat off because I don't want to lose this nice new hat, It's so fast. I didn't take my hat off.
I did notice that when there was a lull in the filming, you grabbed a fishing rod prop and started slinging the jig.
I took one cast. I was hoping for a miracle. That didn't happen. It was a little hot out there. So, midday sun, didn't
it was.
Too much.
And I don't blame you a bit.
All right. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. Lenny, you want to tell us
sure.
About our giveaway tonight?
So, first off, let's talk about Delmarva Fishing Reef Pilot by Wayne Young. This is going to be the prize, people. Somebody is going to win this book tonight, and it covers wrecks, reefs, hotspots from the C&D Canal to Cape Henlopen, to Cape Charles, and the Chesapeake Bay Eastern Shore. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. If you read Fish Talk, and I hope you do, then you're familiar with Wayne's articles. He gets down into the nitty-gritty on these different spots. It's really interesting stuff. And it's a kind of a tough question tonight, but we'll see who gets it. It's going to come early on, people, so pay attention, stay on top of it. And when I ask the question, when we see the slide, plug your answer into the comments. Zach will field them. And let's not forget, anytime you have a question about anything we're talking about, feel free to plug it into the comments. We like this venue because we can kind of talk in a way, and Zach will grab your questions and throw them up on screen, and we can address them. And beyond that, I guess we should do a recap on the fishing report before we dive into tuna tactics.
Sure thing. I'm going to step away here and just holler when you're ready for slide number 1. I know that's going to be in a few minutes. So
all right. Well, wait. Don't go yet. Are you still there? You're still there.
I'm still here. Okay.
So talking about the fishing report, you had a spectacularly interesting catch this week. Why don't you tell everybody what that was?
Oh, sure. Well, we had a couple of days last weekend on your boat. Windy day, we stayed in the river. We didn't find keeper fish, stripers. One spot, I think I got a little frustrated, put the sabiki rig on and pulled up a spot at one of the bridges. And then we ran south looking for specks, but all we found was rockfish. But we got half a dozen keepers.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't keep half a dozen, but we got half a dozen in the keeper size range on top of another 12 or so. And then hitting some of the favorite spots on the way home. Everyone was catching stripers, and I pulled in a ribbon, a.k.a. cutlass fish.
In the South River.
Which I've been fishing that river for nearly 4 decades and have never seen or heard one caught. Now, some other people chimed in and said they have caught them recent weeks as well. So it's kind of becoming a common thing.
That was the first South River cutlass fish I have ever seen in my life.
Me too.
I thought that was pretty darn cool.
I have a feeling it's not going to be the last.
I hope you're right. They're actually quite tasty fish. They're very interesting. And they swim backwards when they're on the line. So they got this really weird tug to them. And then when they stop tugging, you pull them through the water. And since they're long and skinny, there's like no resistance. And you think they're gone. And then the next thing you know, you feel this tug again. It's interesting fish to catch.
Yeah.
So I thought that catch was pretty darn cool.
Hey, every year I strive to catch a new fish species. Now I'm off the hook for the year. I got one. So.
You got it. So meanwhile, around the dial, but Okay, Robert, I agree with you. Pinwheel them up. You're saying with some bacon. I like to do it with some crab. Make a little crab imperial, and then lay it across the fillet, and then pinwheel it, and then bake that guy. That is good. That's good stuff. I'm gonna have to try it with bacon now, though, because I honestly that didn't occur to me yet. Interesting. All right, so going around the dial, way up north, they're catching some rockfish. They're catching a whole lot more catfish. Catfish is, in the way north zone, they're just the blue cats are all over the place. We got a couple readers over there who sent in pictures pretty consistently over the last few weeks of 20 to 30 plus pound catfish. So it's a happening thing. We also got a real nice report of a real nice snakehead out of the gunpowder this week. It was a 32 incher, so that's a bona fide dragon. It was the only bite of the day. He only got the one, but it was a banging fish. Of course, Baltimore, that holds the lion's share of the rockfish. It has pretty much all year. It continues to do so. And many of the normal hotspots are, quite honestly, barren. Upper Bay and Middle Bay, a little better in the Upper Bay. Middle Bay, your standard issue spots, Thomas Point, Poplar, large swaths of Eastern Bay. A lot of these places, they're not holding the fish like they usually do. There are some fish in the shallows in Eastern Bay, and the rivers. The rivers have been holding good fish, and I've been doing better in the river than I have close to home in the immediate area. Now, some runs down to the chop tank. Zach mentioned we went down there looking for specks. I think that was Sunday. We did not find them that day. We had good rockfish fishing, but we didn't find the specks. Interestingly, I went back just the other day, and we got 5 specks. So there are some specks in that little chop tank, moving your way down to the Tangier zone, that whole area. There are some speckled trout. Also picked up one at the power plant the other day. Wayne's chiming in, mentioning caught 6 and released plus minus 40 today. Very nice. Largest was 20. Okay. Last Potomac striper fishing day until late August. Yeah. Potomac has been interesting. We've gotten very mixed reports from the Potomac. And even from the same people. Our contributor, Eric Packard, has fished it multiple times recently. One day he goes out there and he catches several specks and a pile of rockfish. The next day he goes out there and he doesn't catch squat. And I heard from someone today who caught a couple bluefish, but that was it. So it's very up and down, very, very sporadic. Other hot spots, Cape Charles is the cobia zone right now. Still not getting good reports much north of that. We did hear from a reader off of he comes out of the Rappahannock and mentioned he'd found a few close to home, but most of the time when he was doing his catching, he was running down towards Cape Charles. So if you want to go looking for the cobia, that's probably what you want to do. We also did hear from a fellow who went out yesterday out of Cape Charles. They were sight fishing. They spotted about 20 fish. They caught 6, but only one of those was a keeper. There were a lot of small ones. So interesting. That's really the major stuff. There's still some bull reds down at the CVBT as well. Specks, once you get anywhere from really the south of the Patuxent on the west side, the chop tank on the east side, anywhere south of that, you can get into them. And that's pretty much the recap. So I think, Michael is saying, looking for advice on striper on the flats. We heard of fish being caught up there earlier. It was a topwater early morning bite. So the first advice is, go really early. But that bite seems to have tamped down. I haven't been hearing about that much lately. I think that dropped off. And I should say that in a lot of the areas where there aren't a lot of fish being caught, Eastern Bay in particular, I keep hearing there is a topwater morning bite. There's a good topwater morning bite. I've heard the same of Poplar too. Now, I don't like to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, so I miss most of that. But if you're willing to get up and go do it, that's going to help. Check Fish Talk Mag fishing reports. We will have a full report going up tomorrow by noon. Crabbing report. Oh man, crabbing's been pretty darn good. And it's not even that the numbers have been outrageous. I mean, I went the other day and I got 28, I think it was, in like 2.5 hours. So it wasn't outrageous numbers, but they were huge. I mean, they were monster crabs.
How many did you get?
I think it was 26 or 28.
Well, I got 30 jumbo Megatron crabs.
Oh.
So I just got to throw that out there, you know.
On your kayak.
Well, I had help. I had some family too, so there's a couple of them.
But you were trot lining on the kayak, right?
Yeah, I was teaching them how to do it. So.
Which is, I gotta say, folks, it's a really cool thing. You think about it. You go out on a kayak and run a little trot line and catch a pile of crabs. And if you
catch
want to know
more
how to
crabs
do it,
than Lenny on his boat.
yes.
I'm sorry.
And if you want to know how to do it, go to our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, search Fish Talk, and search for the kayak crabbing video. And he lays it out. It's a great video.
I learned from you, so thank you. I just adopted your technique to the kayak. So thanks.
Took the boat method to the kayak. Huh?
That's one thing I should have said in the video. I should have. Sorry. We got a few more questions before we dive into tonight's topic. So
okay, pop them on up there. How far north did the sheepshead make it? Last year, we heard of a couple that were caught near the target ships. Just a couple, and that's unusual. You're not likely to see them in Maryland waters, not in numbers you can really target them. If you are willing to travel south, go to Kiptopeke, the cement ships, the CBBT. That's where you're really going to find them. And also the Ocean City Inlet. There have been a good number in the Ocean City. Yeah, the Ocean City Inlet has been producing them in recent years. Haven't heard of any there this year yet, I don't think.
Yeah, so the big kayak fishing paddle tournament, tons of big sheepshead, I think, made the leaderboard, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So,
and that is late June, is that right?
No. That was like 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so they were there 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, if you got is there another question coming, or should we go to slide 1? I don't know. I don't know what's happening behind the curtain. There it is, slide 1. So this slide was put up for a very specific reason. Hopefully you can tell that's a really big fish. He was well over 100 pounds, maybe 150, 170, something like that. And that's a bluefin. And look at that little itty bitty, teeny tiny leader tied onto that hook. It's such a light leader, you don't even need to crimp it. So tip number 1, always have 30-pound fluoro on board when you're going to go chunking for tuna. Now, you won't necessarily have to use it. And when you hook up a big fish on 30-pound, it is a challenge to get that thing to the boat. You got to go light drag. You really got to play it. It takes skill. But there are some days when those fish just will not touch anything heavier. And it's generally clear water, bright sun. And those tuna put those big eyeballs to work. They can see that line. Some days you can get away with using 80, but other days you got to use the 30. Now, I had a day, this is going way back. This is probably 15 years ago. We pulled a school of tuna off of a scalloper, me and another boat, and we worked together. We held them. We held them all day with our chunks. We literally, between the two of us, constantly throwing chunks. You look over the side of the boat, you'd see 50, 60 tuna swimming around in circles. That's just what was within sight. And between the two of us, drifting and chunking the whole time, we constantly kept them. And we got to experiment a little bit. And I tried tying on 60-pound leader, all fluorocarbon, flipping the bait in the water and watching them. And they would literally swim up to it and stop 6 inches away, turn around, swim away. So I went to 50, same thing. I went to 40, same thing. Swam right up to it and they stopped. I could just look down clear as day, watch them do it. Then I tied on the 30. Vroom, they just came and ate it. So when the visibility is really good, when the sun's really high, you can't get bit. You look around you see other people bit. Immediately pull out that 30-pound fluoro, tie it on, try that. Go ahead to the next slide if you would, Zach. This is another one that illustrates the same thing. You can see this fish. You can see the boat. You sure as heck can't see any line in between them. And normally, when you get underwater photo like this, you can see the line. You can't always tell exactly what it is, but you can see that line going down to the fish. It's just non-existent. That's because that's 30-pound fluoro. And on the day that we caught this guy, I think we got 4 that day, and it was all 30-pound. They just wouldn't eat anything less, and that's just the way it was. So carry that stuff. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide, if you would. Now, this is our quiz slide, people. This is Butterfish, standard issue tuna chunk bait. And I want you people to look at these two flats of Butterfish and tell me what is going on. What is wrong here? There's something wrong with this picture. Okay. Now, while you're putting in your answers, and Zach knows the answer, so he'll throw it up when someone gets it. While they're going up, I want to mention that when you chunk these guys, there are a lot of different ways to do it. The worst way to do it is with a cutting board and a knife. That is literally the worst way to cut your chunks. A big pair of heavy-duty shears works pretty darn good. Color is off. That's correct, Michael, but I need more. The color is off. What's going on? Not in a live well. We wish, Gary. We wish. No, you walked into the tackle shop. You bought your flat of Butterfish. You walked out. One flat was refrozen and the other has not. Kevin, it could be refrozen or it could have just sit too long, but you've basically got it. That top flat is yellowed. That's no good. It's basically rotten. Thawing and then refreezing will definitely cause that to happen. You'll also see that if a unscrupulous tackle shop has a few flats of Butterfish left over at the end of the season, and they leave them in their freezer until next year. And after those fish sit in the freezer for 6-8 months, that's what they look like. They turn yellow. Now, what's going to happen is you go chunking offshore long enough, one day you're going to get your butterfish, you're going to throw them in the boat, you're going to drive 20, 30 miles out, you're going to rip open the box so you can hit them with a washdown hose and start them thawing. And the smell of those yellow butterfish is going to hit you, and you're going to go, oh, no. Basically, your day's ruined. That just ruined your day. You might as well forget about chunking those things. The fish don't want them. They're rotten. They're stinky. They're nasty. So this, I consider this an absolutely critical thing to do. When you buy your butterfish, standing there in the tackle shop, rip that top open. Just rip it back a little bit. Look at them. If they're yellow and nasty, don't accept it. You say to the guy, hey, you got any that are actually fresh? You got any that are actually usable? Because I don't want these. And if they don't, go somewhere else. It's no good. That is not going to work. So, Kevin, you are the lucky winner of Delmarva Fishing Reef Pilot by Wayne Young. And congratulations on that one. Now, to get back to frozen versus fresh, they're both frozen. Thawed and refroze. Hey, you just missed it. Freezer burn. Correct. Yep. Holy cow. So, okay, wait. Slow down, Zach. Because we just had 2 knot on ices there, and I want to address that. So when you buy these butterfish at the tackle shop, they are frozen like a rock. You don't want to put them on ice when you throw them on the boat. Because if you do, when you get to where you're going and you're ready to start chunking, they're going to be solid as a rock. You can't even cut them up, much less use them for bait. So generally what I'll do is, first thing in the morning, I throw them out on the deck. I wait until I'm about maybe an hour from where I'm going. Then I rip the top off, throw it away, take the washdown hose, spray them down with seawater, spray them down good and thorough so then there's water sloshing around in the box. And then by the time you get where you're going, they're going to be thawed. You don't want to use them at all frozen when you're actually fishing. Like you think it might be okay to take the fish and, throw it out there frozen or partially frozen. The problem is then what happens is they float. And you don't want them to float. You want them to sink down to the fish. So you want them completely thawed by the time you start fishing. Now, you do have to be careful. You want to leave them sitting out on deck, all day long. They will get nasty. You want to leave them out until they thaw. When you pull back the throttles, you can start hacking them. On a bigger boat, you can do it on the run. On a small boat, you might not want to start hacking them apart till you get there. But in any case, after you've got a pile of chunks, then you do want to throw the rest of them back on ice and, bring them in and out of the fish box as you need them so they don't get gross. So speaking of the chopping them up part, we started off on that. I do want to mention, if you can get a hold of one of the big giant egg slicer chunkers, do so. They're great. I have a Captain John's Easy Chunk, which is a giant egg slicer that sits on top of a 5-gallon bucket. You throw the fish in, ka-chunk. Those things are awesome. They beat the shears, but they're very hard to find. They're not in the stores. You don't see them around every day. I'm not even sure they're still in production, honestly. But if you can find one of them, get them. If you can't, go for the big, heavy-duty shears. All right. Butterfish ice cubes, top bait. I'm confused, Gary. Can you explain that a little bit? Because I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean maybe take a frozen butterfish and float it back? That might be what you're talking about, but I'm not 100% on that. So, Zach, bring us back when Gary chimes back in on that. In the meantime, let's go to the next slide. Because this goes right into what we're talking about here with the bait. And by the way, I should say, when it comes to chunking, personally, I find bait critical component. You really want that bait to be just right. It can make a huge difference in whether you're catching or not. If you've got 30-pound fluoro and really good bait going, then you are probably not going to have a problem getting bites. You might have a problem catching,
Quick
but
question.
not a problem getting bites. So Kevin's asking, since you need to go very light on the fluorocarbon, have you experienced that indicates that one brand is more abrasion resistant than most? Kevin, I do not. I find most of that stuff to be about the same. I don't buy off brands. I'm generally using, Zach, what's the AFW brand? What do they call that? I have some in my closet. Should I dart over there real quick and get it?
High seas.
I'm sorry?
High seas.
High seas. I like the high seas. Sometimes I will use the stuff with the blue label.
Cigar.
Thank you. But those are name brand fluoros. They're not, something you've never seen before and have no idea where the heck it came from. And I honestly, I find them all about the same. Some are a little softer than others and they're easier to knot, but abrasion resistance wise, I haven't really found a huge difference. It was a joke because the butterfish frozen float. Okay. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide, Zach.
All right. Hey, you got a crazy lens flare. You mind adjusting your curtain or something?
I can't. The dang sun is coming right. I can sit here and hold it.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Hey, we're looking at slides. The sun will go down.
Yeah, keep the slides big. I apologize, people. The sun is in just the wrong spot, and my blinds aren't quite doing the trick. All right, so continuation of the bait conversation. Here we see the yellowfin on the deck, and what's important about this shot is actually that orange 5-gallon bucket. Now, just about the worst mistake I've ever seen anybody make was when we got out there, and the guy who was running the boat, he didn't have shears. He had a cutting board and a fillet knife. And he picked up some butterfish and put them on the board, and he cut some chunks and he threw them over, and he baited some hooks and he put them in. Then he picked up some more butterfish and he cut some chunks and he threw them over. Then he watched for a little while. Then he picked up some more butterfish and he cut some chunks. And I was like, dude, where's your 5-gallon bucket? And he was like, I don't know. What do I need a bucket for? Well, it is critical to have a bucket. The most important thing about your chunk line is that you keep it consistent. It doesn't have to be thick. It's not really that big a deal if you throw over 3 chunks at a time or 12 chunks at a time. If the fish see it, they're going to come eat it, right? And as long as it's consistent, they'll stick with you. They'll hang with your boat. They'll keep eating it till they find a bait. Just as important, very often when you're chunking for tuna, the action comes in flurries. These fish swim in schools. So you got nothing going on for an hour, right? And then all of a sudden, boom, 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 lines start going. Let's say you hook up a fish. Well, keep that chunk flow consistent. You can hold the school under your boat. If there's a 2-minute break in the chunk line, forget about it. The fish are going to go elsewhere. Just slow and steady is the name of this game, but it's got to be steady. Now, I also want to mention, Kevin said when you're using shears to cut up the chunk baits, how many chunks do you get per butterfish? 3 or 4, I would say, is average. I don't like to go a heck of a lot smaller than that. Now, what I do is this is kind of funny. We're getting into the weeds on cutting baits here, but I do this. So, excuse me. Every 10th fish or so, I will actually grab one and just squish it in my hand until it's mush. And then I'll take the shears and cut like 30 little pieces out of it and throw it in the bucket. which sounds a little weird. I get some looks doing it, but here's the deal. When you do that and you start throwing it over the side and all the little bits in the goo get flinging everywhere, it makes a huge mess. But you get all these little bits everywhere, and they've all got the little fish oils in them, and it actually creates a bit of a slick. Now, the slick isn't really a big deal for attracting the tuna, as far as I can tell. But when you get that slick going around the boat, what that does is it actually calms the water right around the boat. And on a day when there's not, really heavy weather, you can see a heck of a lot better. Occasionally, you'll see the tuna fish. Not often, but you will sometimes see the tuna fish. And you might have your lines 50, 80 yards behind the boat, and you might know to immediately get one right behind the boat. What I find more critical about getting that slick thing going and being able to see through the water is mahi. Quite regularly, mahi will swim into the chunk slicks. And if you don't see them, you'll never catch them. You might. They might find a bait. But if you see them when they dart through, and they're generally at the surface, when you see them, you can grab the spinning rod that I know you have rigged and ready to go with a jig on it or with a bare hook, so you can throw a little chunk on there and flip it in and catch your mahi. So that's not really a tuna tip, but you always have a couple spinning rods ready to go. 20, 30-pound class spinning rods. So you can catch the mahi, boom, when you see them. But in answer to the question, generally 3 or 4 chunks, maybe 5 if it's really big butterfish. Sometimes the butterfish are really little. You just cut them in half. John is saying, Captain Joe Riley taught me how to be sure your fluoro stretches straight. A tuna can see a little bend. That's interesting. Huh. Now, Joe, that's a good captain there. And I've never heard that. But I will keep that in mind in the future. That is interesting. And loved your past tuna chunking video. Is there a truth that this time of year it's trolling only that can land tuna? I find trolling so boring. Hey, I'm with you, man. I do too. But when it's the most effective method, I'll do it. Now, generally speaking, trolling does kind of rule up until about July. Now, I can't speak to Long Island. That you might be a couple weeks behind us. Normally here off the mid-Atlantic coast, once July hits, chunking kind of comes in, which is why we timed tonight's episode to be on chunking. Not always. I mean, some years it doesn't happen for another 2 weeks. Some years it starts in June, and some years it doesn't happen at all, right? But as a general rule of thumb, when July hits is kind of when chunking really starts to take off. A lot of the trolling only thing is really because earlier than that, you're going for tuna that are migrating, right? They're going up the coast. They're going through in waves. You kind of want to be on the move. It's hard to locate the fish. And so trolling does tend to do better. Chunking, generally, again, in our area, generally, when it takes place, the fish have sort of set up shop. They've either come into the inshore lumps to feed on sand eels, and if the sand eels are present, those fish might stay there all year long. Sometimes it's effective at the canyons when the fish have moved in, and for whatever reason, they've set up shop in a particular part of the canyon, and they're just kind of hanging out there. They might stay there for a week. They might stay there for a month. And I have seen times when you could troll all day and you were not going to get a bite. Were you on board that day, Zach? You might have been there for that. It happened on Keith's boat. Did you go on Keith's boat, the free spool?
No, I don't think so.
We had a day. It was really interesting. We got to Washington Canyon. We had planned on trolling, but we had a flat of butterfish just in case. And we trolled with everybody else, and nobody was catching a darn thing. There were a bunch of boats out there, 0 bent rods. Chatter on the radio was nothing but abysmal. And we saw something on the meter, weren't real sure what it was, and said, well, let's just try chunking. And we stopped, and we started throwing chunks, and we started hooking up. And we hooked up a lot. And I don't know how many tuna we caught that day. But we were catching really good, and probably an hour into it, the other boats that were trolling around noticed, and those that had bait on board stopped and started chunking, and we started seeing bent rods on other boats too. So, it's one of those you never know things, but generally speaking, once July hits, chunking's good. Here, again, Long Island, that might, a little farther north. That might be a couple weeks farther back. Gary's asking, did you mention the areas off the coast of OC, Maryland that are best weeks of the summer months? I'm thinking you're looking for the spots. The offshore deli is what we call it. And if you go to fishtalkmag.com and type into the search box, it might just work if you just type in deli. Honestly, I haven't tried. We do have an article on this specifically that details these spots. I'm going to do it right now. And basically you're talking the ham bone. Yeah, just type deli into the search box at fishtalkmag.com. It pops right up. Fishing at the hot dog, ham bone, chicken bone, the oceanic deli. And those are if the fish move into the inshore lumps, they're going to be on one or all of those. That's it. No problem finding that one. Jim Sam, what do you refer to when you say lumps? Which ones? Those specific lumps, those offshore deli lumps. The ham bone, the hot dog, the chicken bone, sausages. Some would, the jack spot has a different kind of name. Some would say it's the closest inshore lump to OC. Down farther south in Virginia, look at that. Good job, Zach. We got the map, the chart showing, and we show the different spots. Now, again, those are mostly Indian River, Ocean City spots. Some guys run up here from Chincoteague-Wachapreague. Some run from farther north. Actually, some years you'll see the Jersey guys at the offshore deli. They will make that run. For them, it's like I don't know, 90, 100 miles, but they'll do it. You'll see Jersey boats there. Off Indian River, a little farther north, you got the dump site lump. Macy's Canyon is basically the same kind of thing. That's not a real canyon. It's just sort of a contour. Not really so much of a lump, more of a contour. But and then down south, farther south, Virginia Beach, Wachapreague way, you've got I'm blank, the cigar lump. Now the cigar lump, I don't think has held fish in recent years. It's close to home. It's like the jack spot. It's like 20 miles out. So typical ride, that depends entirely on your boat. The closest lump to OC would be the jack spot, 24 miles. So if you cruise it 20 knots, it's going to take you an hour. Ham bone's 36 from the OCC buoy. The hot dog is at 42, 44. Sausages are somewhere in there, 33, 34. Dump site lump off Indian River is a little closer, I think. I want to say high 20s. Macy's, yep. That's just a little bit more. That's 30-something off Indian River. So all these different spots, you're talking basically 20 to 45 miles out. Excuse me. Woo, good flurry of questions there. If we got any more, throw them up, or if not, we can bop right on to the next slide, Zach. I'm good. The sun, we got a little cloud cover. That's what happened. It's not quite so bad anymore. The parking lot, absolutely. That's another one. Yep. And, we'll pack a flat of butterfish and some live bait. You're stealing my thunder.
No. That was the trolling question. This is a thank you for the trolling. He's trolling. Lau's from Long Island. The Long Island.
All right. Well, he's got the live bait in there. You're stealing my thunder. We're going to talk live bait. We are going to get there.
All right. You ready for the next one?
Yep. Bring it on up, man. All right. So how do you hook on your butterfish? This butterfish that is seemingly suspended in an animation next to the bucket there is hanging down on one of those, gee whiz, you can't see it, 30-pound fluoro leaders. And this particular day, we're fishing whole butterfish, hook in through the mouth, put through the gills, and then out under the gill plate. You want to hide the hook. Whatever kind of bait you use, you want to hide the hook. These fish can see this stuff. They got big eyes, and they're paying attention. So you want to hide that hook, but you want the tip of the point exposed at least a little bit so it can bite into the fish. The old timers used to say, use a whole butterfish for bluefin and a chunk of butterfish for yellowfin. Honestly, I've never seen a heck of a big difference, but that's what they used to always say. Well, I do like using a chunk of butterfish when I'm fishing for yellowfin as opposed to a whole one, simply because it's easier to get it on there and hide the hook in such a fashion that it doesn't spin. When you put on the whole butterfish like that, he likes to spin a lot, and then when you reel him in, it's a pain. All right, go ahead and take us to the next one, if you would, please. Here's our live bait. If you go out and catch a bunch of spot the day before and put them in your live well and take them out there live, you've changed the dynamic. You will catch, I can't say you'll catch more fish. You will get more hits than everybody else all around you who's throwing butterfish. It's very difficult to hide the hook in the live spot. You really can't. I like to go behind the dorsal, and what I do is I use a really short live bait hook. They have all the shank is almost no longer than the point, so you can put it through the back, and it's just a tiny little thing. Get them real thick so they don't bend out. But man, you put that live spot in the water in your chunk slick. You still want to have your chunk slick, but you put that live spot in there swimming around it. They will have a very difficult time resisting. And if you do that, start off with a slightly heavier leader. Start off with at least like a 50 or an 80, and you can probably get away with it. Because the live spot wiggling around outweighs the fish's caution over what it's coming up and looking at. When they see the live spot, they kind of go into attack mode often. Now, Jim's asking what size hook. And Jim, I normally use an 8-aught with a tuna. A 10-aught is good. I don't think you want to go much smaller than that. You could go larger than that, particularly if you're using a circle hook. A lot of guys love the circle hooks for tuna. Sometimes I use them particularly with the 30, because if they start sucking down the bait and then their teeth are moving against the leader, that 30 doesn't last long. It doesn't last long enough, honestly. Generally speaking, like if it's a 50, 60 pound yellowfin, you probably can't fight it to the boat and gaff it before it will chafe through that leader. Very low probability. So you do want to use that circle hook. I can't even say why, but for whatever reason, I've always liked the Gamakatsu octopus when I'm using heavier stuff. And I think part of it is because it's just like if a fish bites that thing, it like never pulls out. They're like magic. They stick in the fish and they stay there. That's an exaggeration, of course, but I do like those for the heavier stuff. But again, with the 30, go circle. All right, Zach, you want to take us on to the next one? And Gary's asking, do you have to use inline circle hook for tuna, or is an offset better? Better is a subjective word. That's a very hard question to answer accurately. I honestly don't worry about it too terribly much. Those tuna usually grab a bait and move so fast. It's like there's no time for anything to happen other than that circle hook to grab in the corner of its mouth and get hooked up. There's certainly no legalities regarding it, as there are with rockfish, where you have to use an inline. Before inline and rockfish became a big thing and everybody had to buy inline circle hooks, it was hard to find them. Pretty much everybody sold offsets. So that's what we were always using. And I honestly haven't paid a heck of a lot of attention since then. Tommy Tuna showed me how to hook a live spot near the anus hole. It works. The spot will swim straight down. That's interesting. Yeah, the behind the dorsal gets him to go down too. If you go through the mouth or through the jaw, he'll stay up top. They don't like to dive on that. That keeps him up top. That's an interesting one. I haven't tried that myself. How do you avoid the taxman sharks? Matthew, there's no getting away from it. If they're in the area and you can't get the fish in fast, it's a risk. I just don't even know what to tell you beyond that. It's when the sharks are in the zone, man, there's just not a heck of a lot you can do about it. I mean, obviously, you want to catch the fish as quickly as you can. Don't give the shark a chance to come up there and get it. But again, if you're on the light leaders, that's just not a realistic possibility.
Lenny, have you had a chance to test any of that shark deterrent products that are on the market?
I have not tried it, and there's a new one out there that claims to be highly effective. It came out remember they had it at ICAST last year?
Yeah.
I forget what it was called. Do you remember?
I don't, but I'll probably remember next week.
I think it's magnetic, isn't it? It uses a magnetic field to repel sharks.
Yeah, and you slide it down the line. It's like
Yeah. It is alleged to be highly effective, but I don't have the personal experience to vouch for that.
Bands.
What's that?
Shark bands.
Shark bands.
So, yeah,
I think people are using it. I think it works, but I just can't vouch for it myself.
If you are a fan of reviews online, it's got 4.5 stars, so that's pretty telling.
Well, you would think if it didn't work, it wouldn't be that high. Raymond asked if I snell or tie. I tie, honestly, because I'm lazy, and I can't tell much of a difference. You will find very good anglers who will tell you should snell it, and I don't want to argue with them. It may give you a little edge on the hookup. They say it hooks up better. May give a little edge on the hookup. Personally, I just tie them on. have never found it problematic in any way, shape, or form, and it's just a lot faster. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Oh boy. That is a fish that we caught at the ham bone, I think it was. Might have been the hot dog. And when I catch a tuna fish, I like to gut it immediately, bleed it out, and stuff the body cavity full of ice before I put it in the fish box. And when I started to do it, that's what happened. All those little squids came spilling out. Interestingly, those squid were all just about the size of the squid that are in the little box of flounder squid that you buy at the bait shop, right? 6-8 inch long squid. After that happened, I started trying squid for baits while chunking in a butterfish chunk slick. And I got to say, I think squid are more effective than butterfish. And you will never find me leaving the inlet without at least 2 or 3 boxes. There's little boxes of squid that they got in the tackle shop, uncleaned, right? You will not catch me leaving the inlet without them. And I put out butterfish too, and sometimes the butterfish catch the fish. But man, tuna like to eat squid. So what do you do with the squid? I'm going to do a demo. Make me big, will you, Zach? I got a demo for you. So you take your squid out of the box. He's about that big, right? This guy. You get your little pair of scissors, or if you don't have one, you put them on the bait table with a fillet knife, and you just snip the very tip of the mantle off. It's hollow once you get off that little teeny tip. Just make a tiny little hole. And you take your line. This is like 200-pound test. I just grabbed it so you could see it. Stick it in the hole. And what's going to happen is you're going to get it a few inches down there, and it's going to snag on the inside of the squid, and spin the line in your hand. And as you spin, push, and that'll get it unsnagged. Spin, push, spin, push, spin, push, till it comes out amongst the tentacles. Now the line's down here, right? Now take your hook, tie your hook on there, and then pull it back up until the line gets right to the bottom of the body. So it's inside the tentacles. Come on, cooperate, buddy. Inside the tentacles, but just sticking out, right? Sometimes the squid will sit like that. Not usually. I help it, okay, by getting the length on it. I take a best guess usually before pulling it up. And you can take a rubber band and just tie an overhand knot in a rubber band right there, and it'll just kind of sit there. That's the ideal way to have it. Sometimes, no matter what you do, it just keeps sliding around. You can't get it to stay. And in that case, you can pull it a little more in and then pop the hook out right about there. And sometimes it'll stay like that. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes the squid will sort of fold up on the hook like this. That's no good. If it does that, rip it off, throw it in the chunk bucket, and get another squid out, and do it again. Try the rubber band first. And if it's still not working, try popping it through there. Once you get one on there straight, that bait right there is an absolute killer. Here's why. You're going to put it on your rod, and you're going to start stripping out line, right? Stripper lines. I called this advanced. I wasn't even going to talk much about the different lines, but generally guys do the float lines, they'll do a bottom line, and they'll do 2 or 3 stripper lines. I don't even bother with the float line, and I don't do a bottom line unless there's bluefin around. That's usually when you're going to get your bluefin, is when they're down on bottom. Most of the time chunking for yellowfin, I'm just doing strippers, where your reel is in free spool, clicker on. You're grabbing line at the tip, throw your bait in the water, throw a handful of chunks on it, grab your line, pull it down. Grab your line, pull it down. Pull out enough line that bait just sinks naturally along with those chunks. That's ideal. A fish hits it, starts screaming, immediately go and lock the reel up. That's it. That's all there is to it. That's your best line. When this guy sinks a squid, all those little tentacles, and you'll see this when you do it, all those little tentacles just wiggle around seductively. I mean, you want to jump in and eat it. It looks so good. And that's just a total killer. Often they can't resist that. So get your squid and put one of them out there in the mix, and you don't see if he doesn't get hit before the butterfish do, more days than not. Like I say, there will be days when the butterfish will be the ticket, above all else. But more often than not, that squid, that is the ticket. All right. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please, Zach.
How about a quick question?
Bring it on. As far as hiding a hook, I find that perplexing being that tuna hit a spreader bar with an exposed hook hanging off crazy colored lures. Just curious on why that is. So I have a theory on this, and I can't tell you it's scientific evidence, but I agree with you. They hit all kinds of wacky stuff that's being trolled. But when you're chunking, it's either sitting there or it's slowly sinking. So they've got time to look at it. When you're on the troll, you're moving along at 6-7 miles an hour, and that stuff's dragging through the water. And a spreader bar in particular is, it's making quite a ruckus as it's dragging through the water. So I don't think they can see everything quite as good. It's all moving. There's churned water and bubbles involved. Whereas when you're chunking, it's just slowly sinking, and they can swim right up and look at it. They get a good eyeball on it. The troll bait, I just don't think they can get quite as good an eyeball on it. And I think the leader choice is evidence of that, because God forbid you troll with 30-pound test, right? I mean, you've got 120-pound to 250-pound leaders out there, and the fish still hit it. And we actually, years ago, we did a really interesting experiment where we trolled over a diver. We put a diver out, and we trolled over him with different pound test leaders to see if he could see him. And the most fascinating thing was, what we learned was, what he saw more than anything else was the little V where the line entered the water. He saw that more than he saw like any of the lures or the rig baits, where the line hit the water, it makes that V. He said that was like incredibly visible above all else. It's interesting. So now we're how long are the leaders you use? So when I'm chunking, I'm using like a 4 or 5 foot leader. That is it. If you are going direct line to line, there's nothing wrong with going a little longer. If you're going to use a swivel, I don't like wind-ons. I find they jam up in a lot of stuff, and they damage guides that they don't jam in. They just, I don't know, they always seem to get in the way. So if you're using a swivel, you really don't want to be more than 4 or 5 feet, because otherwise you can't lift the fish high enough to gaff it. Excuse me, not without wiring it. You can't wire a 30-pound test. You try wiring with 30-pound test, you're going to break the fish off half the time. It's just impossible to be that gentle, at least for me. I find that if I'm working the 30-pound, God forbid I touch that leader. I want it going directly off the rod tip, so that rod can, absorb the fish's motions, and it's not, it's much less likely to break off that way. So I'm using a short leader, and often I'll do that with a small ball bearing swivel, like a 120-pound test ball bearing swivel, which is pretty small, maybe an 80. Sometimes what I have done in the past, I've eliminated that and used a longer, going line to line direct, which is a gamble. Because sometimes, like I was saying, you get those butterfish that spin. When you're stripping them back, that's not a problem. But when you're reeling them in, if they do that spinning, you do 3 or 4 drifts back, and your line starts to get really crapped up with twist. So it's risky. And you can mitigate it. You can watch the baits and go, okay, that one's spinning. I'm going to re-rig it. I'm going to put it on different. You got to do that. But, otherwise it's 6 of one, half of a dozen of the other. It's a risk either way. So, but I'm usually going short. Just to be clear, the demo that you did was an artificial squid. Are you suggesting using artificially getting live squid and hooking the rig the way you demonstrated? I'm suggesting you do that with regular, the little box of flounder fishing bait squid that they sell at the tackle shop. Get those squid, thaw them prior to arriving. I used this, honestly, because it was sitting in my closet. And it made for an easy demo. If I had thought to go out and buy a box of squid, I could have done that, but yeah, don't do it with the artificial squid. Do it with the real thing. Do it with the real thing. Where do you set your drag at when chunking? General rule of thumb, about 1/3 of the breaking test of the line. So if I've got 30-pound leader on there, I'm only putting on like 7-8 pounds of drag. That's it. That's why I say you need to use some finesse with that. And if I can get away with 80-pound leader, I am immediately cranking that drag up, and I'm putting on like 25 pounds of drag. And I'll get that fishing a lot faster that way. But that's kind of the general rule of thumb. Should we go to the next slide? We got more questions.
We do. We have one question.
Bring it on. What is your favorite way to prepare eat tuna? It depends on the tuna. Yellowfin is going on the grill. Bluefin, oh man, the sushi off the Toro is just, that's the best. That's my favorite. Great way to prepare bluefin steaks, which are really kind of strong and really deep red. A lot of people don't really like bluefin compared to yellowfin. But if you take a mix of brown sugar and black pepper, freshly ground black pepper, can't just shake it out. You got to use a grinder. And you mix it 50-50 and dredge the chunks of tuna in, let's see, first scrambled egg. And then you take your 50-50 mix and you add in maybe a quarter of flour and mix it all up. Dredge it in the egg, dredge it in the mix, the black pepper, brown sugar, flour mix, coat it up really good. Like, it's actually best to do egg, batter, and then fry that. That's phenomenal. That's a really good recipe. All right, what do we got next? When you're live lining or floating baits back, is there a rule of thumb with balloon sinker placement? So, like I said, I don't do the balloon thing. And I used to. I did. But I found that I caught fewer fish on it and that I was getting more doing the strip back lines. So why dedicate lines to that when I could dedicate those lines to stripping back? So rule of thumb with floats, I'm saying floats, not balloons, because we all used to use balloons. Nowadays, it's frowned upon for environmental reasons because you want the balloons floating around. But you can get really big foam floats. I've got a couple on my boat. They're about that big that you can rig on that when you get a fish on, they start to slide through. You can also do a foam pool noodle, works very good. Rig it on your main line. So the foam pool noodle with a hole in the middle just slides up and down your main line. And then when you're ready to deploy, pull a little bit of line out and loop it around it, and then take a rubber band and put it around that so it holds it there. And then when a fish gets on, it'll pop that rubber band, and then the pool noodle will slide up and down. Anyway, rule with placement is basically you want the depth to match how far away from the boat you want to set it so that the chunks are at the same depth range as the chunks that are floating past in the chunk slick. And that'll vary. It varies depending on the drift. It varies depending on the current. If you're at anchor, it varies depending on the wind. It's variable. It's something you got to play with. You got to change up. Sinker placement. I don't really have a rule for that. Again, I don't use the balloon lines. Now, when I do a bottom line, what I do is I take a 8-10-ounce lead, depending, maybe heavier, depending on current, tide, how fast I'm moving, everything else. And I take a heavy rubber band, put it through the eye of the sinker, and then put it through the swivel, and then back over the sinker. So it's on there against the swivel on the rubber band. And then if a tuna takes that bait and takes off, that rubber band breaks like that. It just breaks in no time. And then you're just fighting the fish. Sinker's out of the way. All right. When will we see a wicked tuna? Gary, never. I can't stand that show. If I hear that fish finder they have that goes beep, 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 beep one more time, my head will explode. And it shows a little fishy picture. That drives me nuts, honestly. Never.
The folks at Wicked Tuna use the same outfitter that you use for your boat. So, I mean, you are influencing the Wicked Tuna. They use BOE Marine, I think.
Do they really?
That's what they have in previous.
I had no idea.
Is anyone from Disney watching? Maybe we could get you on Wicked Tuna.
Oh, God. Yeah, the BOE folks do good work. I'm sure that's why they use them.
They did the New England boats. I don't know if they do the Outer Banks boats.
Huh.
Or they did years ago. I don't know.
All right. Well, shoot, you better take me on to the next slide. How are we doing on time? Holy cow. We got to race through some slides here. All right. So the reason I put this slide up is because I wanted to show you how there's a guy on the bow hooked up. There's guys in the stern. They're still working the lines. When you're hooked up on a fish that school's nearby, I guarantee you these guys are pros. They were chunking the entire time as soon as that fish hit. So they're going to get a multiple, right? Or hopefully they're going to get a double hookup, maybe a triple. On a small boat, it's much harder to do. But the point here is if you've got a fish on and it stretches that line out and it's away from the boat, you're still chunking because you know you want to hold the school. It's a little risky, but put another bait out there. get it instead of clearing all the lines out of the way, reel them up and immediately start stripping them back from right at the boat. And there's a very good chance you'll get a second hookup. Actually, I would leave one out, reel one in, and let it go. You don't want a whole bunch of lines out, obviously, because those fish change directions fast. You could end up with a big mess on your hands. But if you can at least try and get one other line going while you've got one hooked up, you've got just a much better chance of getting into the multiple fish game. And a lot of guys, again, especially with that 30-pound test, you might be on a 50-pound fish for 2 hours if you play it right, which that really saps a lot of the day out. You want to get that double hookup. You want to get multiple fish while you can. 2 hours is probably an exaggeration. I've seen it, that happens with bigger fish. But, it's going to take you an hour with a 50, 60, 70-pound yellowfin. So you want to get those doubles. All right, go ahead and take us to the next slide if you would, please, Zach. So this is that same picture from before. I just enlarged it here, blew it out so you could see the rod and reel. That's a 30-pound class spooled with mono. I would say that's very, very, very common for this type of fishing, chunking on these school-size yellowfin. I do something a little different. Zach, go ahead and make me big, please. What I really like to use, this is a Shimano Talica 10. It is a 10-2, actually. It's a 2-speed. It's got 50-pound braid on it. It's an udder pea shooter. And this thing has killed fish over 200 pounds. It's not a problem. Today's modern, really high quality reels can handle that kind of duty. You can crank this drag up to 25, 26 pounds, not a problem, and really stick it to the fish. They're not cheap, but that Talica 2, man, I love this thing. This is a glorious rod. It's actually a really good marlin rod, too, a really good pitch bait rod. I have a 16S that I like a lot. Torsa that I don't believe they make anymore that I like a lot, another 16. And what I do is I take these tiny little reels and I put this 50-pound braid on. And it is really just a lovely rod to use. You can hold it forever. You don't have to fight the gear like you do with some of the heavier gear. This rod is a Travala. Oh gosh, how am I going to show it to you? It's kind of tough in this venue. It's very thin, it's very limber, but it's got a ton of backbone, and you can't break this thing. It has killed some really shockingly monstrous fish. So that's what I like to use. You should use whatever you like to use. But whatever you do, go ahead to the next slide, please, Zach. Whatever you do, if you're going to use the heavier gear, make darn sure you get a good belt and harness. Nothing annoys me more than when I get on a boat with 30s and 50s and they pull out one of those silly little put it around your waist plastic things that does no good for anybody other than prevent the bruise from jamming a gimbaled butt into your stomach. A good braid and harness, like this is a braid outfit right here. This is what allows you to take the fight to the fish instead of taking the fight to the gear. Most people battle the gear more than they battle the fish. Really, really highly experienced anglers can get away with some of the crappier harnesses and oh, for God's sakes. Now I'm blanking. really, really experienced anglers can get away with some of the crappier gear. The gimbals, the harnesses and the gimbals. But most anglers are just going to battle that rod. It's going to be wobbling back and forth in the crappy piece of plastic. They're not going to have any leverage. They're going to be using their arm to try and pull the rod up. No, no, no. You should be keeping that arm straight and rocking back in that harness against the gimbal to pressure the fish. You do that, you can work a rod for hours at a time. You can work a rod for 4.5, been there, done that, 4.5 hours on fish that weigh hundreds of pounds. And with a setup like this, you can do it. You can do it. I'm not a big husky guy, right? But I've been there, I've done that. And that outfit is what allows you to do it. So if you're going to use that heavier gear, your stock 30s, your stock 50s, get a good harness and belt. All right, what do we got up next, Zach? Aha. I put this in here as an example. That is a 12-year-old angler there who is currently a professional charter boat mate and captain. And you can see that fish was, way over 100 pounds. I mean, it's as long as him. It's quite chunky. That fish was caught on that rod that he is holding, which is minute. And you can do it. You can absolutely do it. All right, go ahead to the next one if you would, please, Zach. Or is that the last one? Did we make it through this one?
That's the end of the roll there.
That's the end of the roll. Woo, my goodness. I thought we weren't going to make it in time. What time is it? Barely in time. All right, folks, if you got any questions, now is the time to pop them in. What's that?
Yeah, we got a couple, I think.
All right, go ahead and let's get them on there. We've already run out of time, but we can keep going a little bit. It's not going to upset me.
No time limit.
Yeah, that's right. There's no rules. What rule? What are you talking about?
Oh wait, but I just had to prove that I wasn't crazy.
Why is that?
The Wicked Tuna guys use the same stuff that you use. Look at that. BOE.
BOE. Yep, you're right.
Look at that up there. And
that's funny.
There too. Yeah, that's
Oh, look at that. They got it on multiple boats.
Yeah. That's the hard merchandise. He was popular.
Yeah.
But
Thank you.
All right. So we got Garland has a two-part question. I'll just put them both up right back to back here. So first off, do you anchor or drift fish? And the second question is, what depth do you target in the water column?
Okay, so anchor or drift is a awesome question, which honestly took me a while to figure out. Purely based on conditions. Do I anchor? Yes. Do I drift? Yes. More often drift, but I'd rather anchor. I find it kind of easier. The boat isn't sitting beam to the sea half the time. You don't rock around as much. It's just easier to do everything, Now, when you hook really big fish, you got to be prepared to dump the anchor. You got to have a float, and your anchor line has to have a clip on the end, and you got to be ready to just clip on the float, uncleat it, and throw it. Because if you have like a 100, 200 pound fish that's going crazy, you have a very good chance of it going around that anchor. You can walk around the boat on most boats and work the rod over or under the anchor line. That I've done that too. But with a really big fish, I like to pitch that anchor, get rid of it, get it out of the way, get away from it. Now that said, I think more often than not, by a little bit, drifting is more effective, because what happens is a lot of times if the wind is blowing this way and the current is going this way and you drop the anchor, your boat will sit one way and all your lines will go the other. Well, heck, now all your lines are going towards your anchor line, or maybe they're going under the boat, or half of them are going under the boat. It can be a real pain in the butt. It just doesn't work out well. And then if you do hook a fish, you're probably going to get tangled up on something gets messed up. There are also times when the fish are going to be in really tight little areas over structure. And if you drift across them, you'll hook up. If you anchor perfectly, you'll hook up. But there will be 10 other boats that are drifting across it. And if you anchor right there, you kind of screw everybody up. It really does screw everything up. So this is one of those things, it's a constant judgment call. You go out there, you try a drift. You see a particular spot you really want to anchor on, you try anchoring, assuming it's not going to mess anything up. You try 15 minutes and you don't like it, you pull that anchor up. It's a judgment call. It changes. It changes with every day, and there's no solid answer as to which one should you do. It's something you got to constantly change up. Now, as to depth in the water column that we're trying to target, again, I like the stripper lines. They're going through the water column, right? I'm putting this in free spool with a clicker on, rods in the holder. I'm grabbing at the tip. I'm pulling out line. I'm pulling out line. I'm letting it sink. It's almost taut. I'm pulling out more line. I want that thing to sink through the water column with the chunks as they go down continually. On a really calm day without a lot of current, even without any weight, I have reached bottom before in like 100-ish feet of water. Like the hot dog, the shallowest point is 108 feet. And the reason I say I've reached bottom is because I've had bottom lines that got squid bites all over them. They make this, they take like a scallopy little chunk out of the fish. You can tell it's squid eating on them. And then I've had strip back lines that I've worked for a long time and reeled them in, and they've had the same little bites taken out on the bottom, whereas the ones that only worked a short amount of time don't. So you can eventually work it down there all the way if you do it right. Go through that water column. I generally don't go all the way. Usually I'll do it for like 10 minutes, maybe 5-10 minutes. Depends on how windy it is, how fast am I moving, how much line's going out. 5-10 minutes on average. With the squid bait, I will then apply drag and leave it in the holder for a couple minutes, because that squid will swim nice and pretty back up through the water column as tension is applied to the line. Chunk baits, I'll do it a little bit. I don't do it a lot. I don't find it gets many bites when the chunk bait's just getting dragged through the water as you drift. Occasionally it'll happen, but not a heck of a lot. The squid get a lot more bites doing that. So I might do it with a chunk bait for, a minute, 2 minutes, and then I'll crank it back, re-go. And every time, remember, throw a handful of chunks in, then throw your bait right on top of it. Let it get a few feet away from the boat, throw another handful of chunks in. So you want to kind of thicken the chum line, the chunk slick, right around your bait. We got any more questions, Ed? Do you swim your tuna to cool it down? I'm not sure I understand that. I'm not sure what you mean by swim your tuna. Do you know, Zach?
I didn't either. I thought you might know.
No, I'm not sure.
All right, Matthew, if you could clarify the question, we'll return to that one.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. Just let me know what you mean. Frozen chum buckets? Nope. Chunks. I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with hanging a frozen chum bucket off the side. And actually, have I done that? I've thought of that before. It's not a bad idea because you get that slick effect where you can see through the water. But there's already so much going offshore. There's a lot to deal with. But your fish attractor, it's not chum, it's chunks. Because those chunks, when you cut that butterfish into 3, 4, 5 pieces and throw it in, those chunks sink. You can watch them. You can see them 20 feet from the boat regularly. 20, 30 feet down. You'll still be seeing them if there's good water. So chum tends to, stay much closer to the surface. On top of which, if you just do straight up chum, you're probably more likely to bring in sharks, which, as we talked about earlier, we do not want to do. It's unavoidable sometimes, but we don't want to encourage those sharks to come up to the boat. No, I do not. Generally, when I'm chunking, I'm on the drift or at anchor. So if I get it in, but even actually when I troll, I haven't really heard of that. Tie it off by the tail and drag it. Now I've tied it off by the tail and gutted it and bled it over the side of the boat. I like to do that. It's a lot less messy. There's a lot less cleanup at the end of the day. No need for smaller tunas bleeding. Yeah, I bleed them all. Anything keeper size. I bleed, I gut. I gut it on the spot, bleed it, and then stuff that body cavity full of ice. And that does make a big difference. Never heard dragging them, though. Swimming the tuna is for bigger fish before boating it. So you're saying rope around the tail, drag it backwards. That makes sense if you've got a really big fish, because that does, dragging them backwards does kill them, as I understand it. Not something I've really done, but Kevin's chiming in on the shark bucket. Yeah. I'm in agreement on that one, Kevin. Would you take your campus out there to tuna fish? Not would I. The question is, when will I? And the answer is, as soon as I have time. Yeah, absolutely. Of course. It's a very capable boat. 26-foot boat these days going offshore is nothing. My 22 Glacier Bay, I ran to the Washington on a very regular basis for a long time. And that's 72 miles out. It never bothered me a bit. It was a very capable boat, very competent boat. I wouldn't do it on most 22s. But 24, 26, as long as it's a competent boat, it's really not a problem these days. Boats are much better, and engines are much more reliable. And on top of that, these days, when you go to the offshore deli, ham bone, hot dog, chicken bone, it's not like you're going to be alone. You do it on a Wednesday afternoon in the summer, there are going to be 20, 30 boats around you in all likelihood. You do it on a Saturday, there are going to be 120 or 130 boats around you. So it's really not the same as it was, years and years ago, when there was a pretty decent chance your motor wasn't going to run at some point and there was nobody anywhere around you. We got any more questions queued up, Zach? You take on tuna at first light versus 9 a.m. or after. I hear all the time, have to be there at first light. Then here later, first caught is around 10 a.m. or later. Honestly, I've seen it go both ways. I have seen days where first light is the ticket. And I've seen other days where I didn't catch a dang thing until, like you said, 10 o'clock. And then they came on. I can't explain that to you. I can't tell you why. What I can tell you is, if you're really dedicated and you want to give 110%, you're going to be there at first light, and you're going to be there at 10, and you're going to be there at 1, and you're going to be there at 3. You know what I mean? There's no telling. You will have entire chunks of the season go by, months at a time, a month here or whatever, where it's an early bite. It's a daybreak bite even, but it's an early bite. And by 9 o'clock, it's all done. And you will hear everyone say, got to be there first light. That'll go on for, maybe a week, maybe a month. And then it'll change. And these are fish we're talking about, I don't have them 100% figured out. I don't think anybody does. And anybody who says they have them 100% figured out probably has a really big head, Fish do different stuff at different times, and there's honestly just no explaining it. So that becomes a matter of how dedicated you are, how willing you are to get up ridiculously early to put forth that level of effort. I'll say this. When it's a daybreak bite, it is also often a sunset bite. And you can flip the script and instead go out at, leave the inlet at 10 o'clock, fish until dark. Now, that means you're going to be running at dark, which is a whole different ball game. You have to have your what together. I wouldn't suggest it to anyone who's not experienced at running at night as well. All your safety gear's got to be in order. Definite new element of danger there. But if you're experienced and comfortable with it, that is a way you can flip it. And actually, that is particularly true with big eye. There will long periods of time will go by where, guys will come back to the dock with big eye, but they come back to the dock at 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night, because they caught them at sunset. All right, we got any others? What do you think is the best wind direction to fish out of OC? Michael, anything except northeast. Northeast stands for never, ever. N-E, never, ever. Okay? 5 knots, sure. But when it blows out of the northeast, you get a 10 to 15 out of the northeast, it's going to be miserable out there. Now, I know I was told this by a very competent captain the other day. He was like, oh, I love northeast. It blows in the water. Then the fish get closer. Okay, sure, fine. But God, I don't want to go fishing in it because it's just always rough. It's just always rough. Didn't mention jigging while chunking, which you definitely can do. John, you can do it. And I have done it, and I do it. I prefer to jig when I'm focusing on jigging, because my personal opinion is jigging is much more effective when you're on the hunt, you're looking for the fish, you spot them on the meter, drop your jigs. That can be a very, very effective way to fish. And that's how I like to jig. Now, if I'm chunking, will there be a rod with a jig on it? And will I pick it up and jig it for a little while? You bet. Absolutely. Absolutely. I did it the last time I went chunking. Absolutely. But if you really want to catch a fish on a jig, target the fish jigging, and you'll do better. Generally, what I find is the chunk bait gets bit before the jig does, and the jig rod ends up getting put away at some point. But sometimes it's very effective. But target them jigging do really well. We do an annual OBX tuna charter, 2 days in mid-June, usually lose 1 or 2 to sharks. This year, boated 1, lost 10 to sharks. Ugh.
19, he said.
19? That's a 19? Oh, my God. Oh, that's hideous. Wow, I can actually read everything now. Lee, I have heard this. I don't say it. I don't necessarily believe it because it's all anecdotal, and they tell us that there are a lot fewer sharks in total. Now, that's not what I've seen. I have also seen more sharks. I have had days in the last 2 or 3 years. I've had days where I hooked 5 or 6 mako while trolling. They're eating the trolled baits. Whereas 20 years ago, I would go shark fishing. This is back when you could, fish for mako. I would go shark fishing, and if I had 2 or 3 bites in a day, that was pretty good. And that was targeting them as opposed to trolling not for them. So it does seem to me like we have an awful lot more sharks in this zone, and I'm including the Outer Banks in the zone, the Middle Atlantic region, a larger Middle Atlantic region. It does seem to me like there are too many now. But that said, if we have them thick real here, and there are none way up north or none way down south or none in the Gulf, and I don't know if there are or not. But the science types keep telling us that there are not enough sharks, that too many of them were killed. So I just don't know the answer to this. Is it an issue? Yes. Have I heard of it? Yes. But, I don't know. It's hard to tell what's going on. Then the next voice through my head goes, well, MRIP has proven to be so wrong on their fish counts in the past that how can you trust any of their numbers? Maybe there are 1 million more sharks than there were. I don't know. It's just so hard to say, Counting the fish in the sea is a very difficult task. It's Herculean. So it's just really hard to say. But man, 1 for 19, that sucks.
I'm not sure if you touched on this already, but if so, you mind recapping?
How do you set up your boat to drift fishing, and have you used drift anchors? I generally do not use a drift anchor. It may be helpful in some situations. It is also another item coming off of the boat for a tuna fish to run a line into. Like if I had one out, I'd get that thing out fast if I hooked up, right? Because you're otherwise going to have an extra appendage for that fish to tangle around. Beyond that, I'm not sure what you mean by setup. I mean, I'll put the stern into the wind, but the tide may be bigger than the wind. You have to kind of feel it out. Try stripping back the rods. If they're not going the way you want, move them around on the boat. Change stuff up. If you don't like it, change it. You might want to spin the boat so the other side is facing into the wind. And different boats drift a little different. Outboards tend to sort of drift transom into the wind, whereas like an inboard is generally going to drift beam into the wind. A cat will drift beam into the wind. But there are exceptions. All boats are a little bit different. Some of them are cocked. Some of them are not. Every boat's a little different. I'm going to say that's something you got to kind of feel out. But as far as putting out a drift anchor goes, I don't know, man. I mean, if it's windy enough that's really going to be helpful, honestly, I probably didn't leave the inlet in the first place. I probably said, yeah, it's blowing 15 to 20. I don't think I want to do that. But, I can see days where it could be helpful if there's a breeze and you're moving a little faster than you wanted to, but it's dangerous. That's going to be dangerous. You've got that line in the water then.
So Lau up from Long Island says hearing lots of makos trolling up there as well.
Yeah, not allowed to keep them. That's right. And I used to love going and doing that. But I got to tell you, I would prefer that they have the no keep rule as opposed to last year where they had a different length limit. Well, last year, it might have been the year before. They had a different minimum length for females and males. And I'm like, okay, hold on a minute. I'm going to bring a 60, 70, 80-inch mako shark up next to my boat and determine the sex while it's in the water. Am I going to ask this shark to roll over and allow me to see its claspers? And then hold out a tape measure and measure it? Because, like, we're asking for somebody's arm to get eaten off here. It was just the silliest regulation I ever saw in my life. You identify the mako shark's sex while it's in the water still on the hook and get a length on it and then gaff it. Not going to happen. But anyway, sorry, couldn't resist. How do we do, Zach? Do we cover it? Have any more questions?
I think we covered it, and
we went through a lot of questions tonight. That was great.
Yeah, thanks for everyone for tuning in. It was awesome. One more question, and then we'll wrap up. All right.
All right. Final question.
This is oh crap. Oh no.
and I'm gonna Andrew Bradford. Thanks, gents. Always something to look forward to. First Thursday of the month. Awesome. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, Andrew. And I want to mention mako sex was. It's true. It's like, who made that rule? Female one length, male the other length. Well, you got to look, underneath the shark to see if it's got clasper. Really? I mean, come on. So Kevin, I want to remind you. I think I might have your address. I think you've won something before, but if you would just email me your address, because I'm not sure I know where it is, and then we will get Delmarva Fishing Reef Pilot on the way to you. And as Zach said, everybody, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. That was a great conversation, I thought. And we'll be back next month, first Thursday of the month, 6 p.m., same channel.
Yep. Yeah, so one last question.
Zach, you're killing me.
Well, I said it.
Come on. Put it up there.
Okay, it's circling back. We touched it in the beginning. I don't think Matthew.
Any cobia in the bay. They're getting some down by the CVBT. They're good. There are good numbers down there. The latest report we got was a lot of them, but mostly small. There was a report of sighting 20, catching, I think it was 6. Only 1 was a keeper. But the farther north you get, the fewer and fewer there are. And they have not really, there have been a dismally low number caught in Maryland waters. The Rappahannock guys haven't been doing great at Windmiller Smith. Few here and there, but not a lot of fish. And we had a report from a Virginia angler who's good, who comes out of the Rappahannock. He's sent us some good reports in the past, and he said most of what he was catching, he was running down to Cape Charles. It wasn't close to home. So
awesome.
Sad to say it. I wish they were here too, but or at least in my neck of the woods, but they're not.
So I just thought that question would wrap things up and remind everyone how hard Lenny and Dylan work on our fishing reports each and every week. Free fishing reports. I want to thank all our sponsors for making that happen. And
check them out. Up by Friday noon.
Thank you, Dylan. Tremendous work. Where'd all these people come from?
Well, thank you for all your work, Zach. We appreciate it. And thanks for making it happen.
Yeah. It's always great fish talk. We'll see you next month.